Mike Gallagher.
When I heard what Americans for Free Markets was all about, I wanted to jump all over it because I've had friends who have been debanked. And what a helpless feeling it must be to have a bank tell you they're not going to do business with you because of your political views. David Ibsen is the executive director of Americans for Free Markets. He's leading efforts to protect free market principles and combat government overreach. And what a joy it is to welcome you to the Mike Gallagher Show. After learning that Joy Reid thinks Jingle Bells is racist, we're going to get serious for a few minutes and talk about a real problem, which is actually the debanking. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me, Mike.
My pleasure. Let's first of all start with talking about this report by the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, the OCC, because this report was very revealing. It speaks right to what you guys are doing over at Americans for Free Markets.
Yeah, sure. And, I think it's important contextually to think about this report from the OCC as being a continuation of developments that started when President Trump issued his executive order to end politicized or government motivated debanking back in August. And the president entrusted or empowered the different government federal agencies to look into this and to put an end to it and find some solutions. What's interesting about the OCC report is that when it first came out, it seemed as if there was, some inference that maybe a lot of the laws were broken or there was a lot of negative behavior on behalf by the banks. But I think if you look into the report, you see that what many of us had been saying and suspected was the case is that the banks are dealing with a very complex and sometimes politicized regulatory framework and environment that pushes them to sometimes make decisions that lead to individuals losing access to bank accounts. But, the banks not also have to deal with this complex environment of regulation where they have to, look at risks and evaluations based on what's best for their companies and also for their clients and their shareholders.
Well, let's go back. I want to go back to the beginning, though. Let's talk about the whole concept of what we know now to be debanking. So banks and the banking industry and the financial institutions believe that they've had some sort of moral obligation to tell people that you can't do business with us because of what you've posted online or because of your political beliefs or your beliefs about, I don't know, COVID or election integrity. Where did this come from?
I think if you think about banks, there's thousands of banks serving millions of customers all across the country, and they have to make decisions for a variety of different reasons based on about accounts that should be opened or closed, and a lot of times banks or accounts are dormant, or there might be some fraud concerns, or there might be different regulatory obligations that the banks need to comply with, and so that's kind of the context in which we're talking about here. There's a smaller subset of banking decisions that are made because of politicized regulatory environment, where you might have politicized supervisory entities that are disfavoring certain industries or certain groups, and they're putting a lot of pressure on banks to reconsider their ties to those particular sectors. And that's something that hopefully now with President Trump's executive order and subsequent actions in Congress, we can prevent from happening again in the future.
All right. Does his executive order go far enough? How does this government-driven debanking end once and for all?
The executive order is a great first step, and I think that you're seeing some of the more onerous or harmful elements that were deployed in the past under previous administrations being removed from the regulatory guidance. But what we want to avoid is kind of seesawing back and forth between politicization or weaponization of the financial system and then reform on the other hand. So I think the next step would be additional actions at the federal level through the Treasury Department. But really, most importantly, I think you want to have something codified in Congress. You want to have a law that ensures that you're not going to use some of these kind of vague reputational risk factors to evaluate accounts. And you're also going to establish a national fair access standard, which ensures that account holders can't be denied access or have access restricted based on religious, political, ideological viewpoints. And also make sure that there's one framework, one national framework that everyone's complying with. So we don't have an instance where you have the banks trying to operate nationally, but complying with different types of debanking laws going from state to state. You don't want to have that kind of patchwork situation.
We're visiting with David Ibsen. He's the executive director of Americans for Free Markets. You can learn all about their efforts, and I hope you do. Go to forfreemarkets.org. It's F-O-R, forfreemarkets.org, and check out the mission of this tremendous organization, Americans for Free Markets. Look, there are plenty of people in our audience who are glad that Donald Trump is in the White House. There are, I'm sure, plenty who are not. The winds change, the pendulum swings. We're not always going to have a Republican in the White House as we go forward. Do you feel confident that if things fall together the way you hope they will, that future administrations will be prevented from being able to use the regulatory state to advance a partisan agenda?
I think it really depends on the progress that continues to be made, and I do think it really depends on action in Congress. And there's legislation called the FIRM Act that's pending, introduced by Tim Scott, and there's also some legislation from Tom Tillis as well that would work to codify these fair access standards and take reputational risk as a weaponized tool away from the regulators. And if we codify that and make that law, then we'll be in a situation where things aren't going to keep going back and forth, and we'll ensure one access standard for all Americans, all customers, and ensure that they're not denied accounts for when they're lawful account holders for these political and religious reasons. But at the same time, we don't want regulators and lawmakers to overreact and further muck up the works. I mean, bankers are experts in what they do, and they have big teams of individuals who evaluate all different kinds of risks, whether it's credit risk, liquidity risk, and reputational risk. And we should let the banks use their expertise to evaluate the customers that they want to service and also the sectors that they want to work in. It shouldn't be that we're forcing banks necessarily to provide services in areas in which they don't necessarily have the requisite expertise. Yeah. Americans can go to other different institutions and get those services.
I'm grateful for the work you're doing. I hope everybody goes to forfreemarkets.org, forfreemarkets.org, Americans for Free Markets. David Ibsen, we appreciate you joining us very much here on the Mike Gallagher Show. Keep fighting the good fight.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
You bet. All right, we're in such a good mood here, and there's a lot of good efforts like those efforts that are going to stop this dreadful practice of debanking. But what happens if the unthinkable occurs next year and Republicans lose control of the House? Greg Gutfeld lays it out in pretty stark terms from Fox News Channel. We'll share that and a whole lot more on this Thursday episode of the Mike Gallagher Show. Stay with us.
For full shows, live and on demand, it's Salem News Channel.